Men don't fear losing a woman the way most people think. They fear what happens inside themselves after they hurt a good one. Because once a man realizes what he damaged, he can't unsee it. When a good woman is hurt, the damage doesn't end with her leaving. It follows him, quietly, persistently, not as guilt at first, but as discomfort. Most men don't immediately feel regret. After hurting a good woman, they feel relief. Relief that the tension is gone, that expectations disappeared, that emotional responsibility loosened. This relief is temporary, because what replaces it is something harder to escape. Comparison. A good woman leaves behind a psychological imprint, not because she was perfect, but because she was consistent. Consistency is rare, and rarity is what the nervous system remembers. The first thing men fear, after hurting a good woman, is realizing how rare her presence actually was. At first, he tells himself, she wasn't that special. This is not arrogance, it's protection. The mind minimizes what it cannot immediately replace. But time exposes the truth. He meets other women. They are attractive, interesting, fun, but something feels missing. Not passion, stability, emotional safety, the way conversations flowed, without performance, the way silence didn't feel threatening. This is when fear begins. Not fear of losing her, fear of realizing he let go of something uncommon. A good woman raises a man's internal baseline. After her, average feels obvious. The second thing men fear is the moment they recognize they were the source of the loss. It's easy to cope when a relationship ends because of incompatibility. It's much harder when it ends because of behavior, because behavior is personal. At some point, often much later, a man connects the dots. She didn't ask for too much. She asked for consistency. She didn't become distant. She became tired. She didn't change suddenly. She adapted until she couldn't. This realization destabilizes self-image. Most men don't see themselves as careless. They see themselves as misunderstood. When a good woman leaves quietly, without chaos, it removes that excuse. There's no dramatic fight to blame, no explosion to point to, just absence. Absence is confronting because it leaves room for accountability. And accountability is uncomfortable when you know you failed someone who was good to you. The third fear emerges subtly. He fears meeting her again as a different man, not because she might reject him, but because she might see through him. A good woman who has healed has a clarity that is unsettling. She no longer tries to be chosen. She no longer explains. She no longer negotiates her worth. Men sense this shift, and it creates anxiety because he knows she can now see him without projection, without hope filtering reality. And what she sees might be accurate. This fear is not about love. It's about exposure, being fully seen by someone who once loved you after you disappointed them is one of the most uncomfortable positions a man can be in. Another fear develops alongside this. He fears that she moved on without being damaged. This contradicts a common belief. Many men assume if a woman was deeply affected, she must be broken. But good women often grieve privately. They heal inwardly, and when they reemerge, they are grounded. This unsettles men because it means his actions didn't destroy her. They refined her, and refined women are more selective, more boundaried, more discerning. That creates loss on a deeper level. Not, I lost her, but I lost access to who she became. That access cannot be reclaimed through words, and that is frightening. Another fear men rarely admit. He fears becoming the lesson. No man wants to be remembered as the one who taught a woman what not to tolerate. Yet that is often the role men play. After hurting a good woman, she doesn't speak badly of him. She simply chooses differently. That silence is louder than anger because it implies growth, and growth implies he was insufficient at the time. Men fear being referenced, not as a love, but as a turning point. This fear surfaces when he sees her boundaries, her calm, her refusal to over-explain. He recognizes those traits were forged in the aftermath of him. That realization does not flatter, it humbles. The next fear is quieter. He fears that he will repeat the pattern because now he knows it wasn't her, it was him. But knowing doesn't mean he has changed. Change requires effort, consistency, emotional maturity, and this awareness creates tension. He begins to wonder if he is capable of sustaining something healthy. This doubt doesn't always lead to growth. Sometimes it leads to avoidance, casual connections, surface level dynamics, anything that doesn't demand depth. But the fear remains. What if I can't do better than I did with her? That question lingers. Another fear slowly replaces the rest. He fears timing. Not that he met her at the wrong time, but that he may never meet that level of connection again. Timing is an excuse until it becomes a regret. And regret doesn't announce itself. It shows up when life slows down, when distractions fade, when comparison becomes unavoidable. Good women don't haunt men because of what they gave. They haunt men because of what they represented. Potential stability, potential peace, potential growth, and potential loss is heavier than rejection. The final fear in this first arc is the most difficult. He fears that she knows she deserved better, not intellectually, but viscerally. A woman who knows this cannot be convinced otherwise, and that certainty means he no longer holds power. In her emotional world, men are not afraid of strong women. They are afraid of women who are no longer emotionally available. To be misled, that fear is quiet, but it is permanent, because once a good woman reclaims herself, the version of her who tolerated less never returns. After the initial realization settles, a quieter phase begins. This is where fear turns inward, because now he is no longer reacting to the loss. He is living with its consequences. One of the most destabilizing fears that appears here is the fear of emotional comparison, not surface comparison, internal comparison. Every new connection is unconsciously measured, not against her beauty or personality, but against how safe he felt when he didn't have to perform. Good women don't exhaust men, they regulate them. After her, emotional chaos feels louder, games feel heavier, inconsistency feels draining, and this creates frustration because he realizes the peace he took for granted is no longer available. This fear doesn't look like sadness, it looks like restlessness. A man who once felt grounded now feels unsettled, and he doesn't always know why. Another fear emerges quietly. He fears that he misjudged power. Many men believe power comes from being wanted, from having options, from not committing. But after hurting a good woman, power begins to look different. He sees that real power was being trusted, being relied on, being emotionally safe. When that is gone, options feel hollow, attention feels temporary, and this realization creates a silent identity conflict. He must face the fact that he confused freedom with avoidance, and avoidance with strength. This fear is difficult because it threatens self-image. Men are taught to value independence, but emotional independence without depth becomes isolation. Another fear settles in. He fears being ordinary, not unattractive, not unsuccessful. Ordinary. A good woman often mirrors a man's potential. She believes in him before he fully believes in himself. When she leaves, that mirror disappears, and without it, he must see himself clearly. This clarity can be unsettling because he now wonders if he lived up to the version of himself she saw. If not, then her absence is a reminder, not of rejection, but of missed growth. This fear intensifies when he notices her trajectory. She becomes more centered, more intentional, more selective, not louder, not bitter, just precise. Precision is intimidating because it reflects maturity, and maturity exposes stagnation. Another fear men rarely admit. He fears that apologies no longer work. A good woman who has healed does not need closure. She already processed the loss. She does not seek validation. This makes apologies ineffective, not because she is cold, but because she is complete. Men fear this because words are often their final tool. When words no longer reopen doors, they are forced to accept finality. Finality is hard when you know something valuable was lost. Another fear becomes clear. He fears that he is no longer the reference point. During the relationship, his attention mattered, his approval mattered, his presence mattered. After healing, those metrics dissolve. She builds a life that does not revolve around his reaction. This shift is deeply unsettling because it removes emotional leverage, and leverage is often mistaken for connection. Without leverage, he must face reality. He is no longer central. Another fear grows. He fears that if he reaches out, he will be met with calm, not longing, not anger. Calm. Calm implies resolution. Resolution implies he arrived after the lesson was learned. Men are not afraid of rejection. They are afraid of irrelevance. A calm response confirms irrelevance, not cruelty, but neutrality. And neutrality is emotionally final. Another fear quietly forms. He fears becoming emotionally immature in comparison to his peers as he watches others settle into grounded relationships. He reflects. He sees patterns. He notices his own avoidance. This awareness doesn't always lead to immediate change, but it creates pressure, pressure to evolve or repeat, and repetition becomes heavier once it is conscious. The last fear in this arc is subtle but profound. He fears that hurting a good woman revealed who he was at that time, and that identity can't be erased. He can grow, he can change, but memory exists, and the awareness that he was once capable of mishandling something good stays with him. This fear is not punishment. It is imprint, an imprint that shapes future behavior or haunts it, depending on what he does next. After fear settles into awareness, behavior begins to change, not outwardly at first. Internally, this is where many men become quiet observers. They don't reach out. They don't explain. They watch. Watching feels safer than acting because action risks confirmation, and confirmation is what they fear. One of the most misunderstood behaviors after a man hurts a good woman is distance. Distance is not always indifference. Sometimes it is restraint. He knows that reaching out without real change would expose him, so he waits, not to manipulate, but to avoid confronting how unprepared he still feels. This waiting creates another fear. He fears that time is no longer on his side. With time, a good woman doesn't soften. She stabilizes, and stability is harder to interrupt than emotion. Emotion can be stirred. Stability cannot. This is why many men return, not with declarations, but with subtle signals. A message, a reaction, a question that doesn't ask much. He is testing for openness, not forgiveness. Openness, because forgiveness still requires access. Openness determines possibility. But here is the fear beneath that test. He fears that access is no longer available, not because she is angry, but because she has reorganized her life. Without him, reorganization is terrifying because it means he was not central, and men often tie self-worth to being central. Another fear grows here. He fears being too late. Without knowing when too late happened, there is no announcement, no closing speech, just a shift, a change in responsiveness, a difference in energy. Good women don't shut doors dramatically. They stop standing in doorways. And this ambiguity creates anxiety because he cannot locate the exact moment. He lost access. This makes regret linger. Regret is easier when there is a clear ending. Ambiguity stretches it. Another fear takes shape. He fears that if he does return, he will be required to show up differently, not with words, with consistency. Consistency requires capacity. Capacity requires maturity, and maturity cannot be faked for long. This is why many men hover instead of re-entering. Hovering allows proximity without responsibility, but hovering also prolongs fear because every moment he watches her life continue without him reinforces the truth. She did not collapse. She adapted. Adaptation is humbling. Another behavior emerges. He may idealize the past, not the relationship, the version of himself who had her. Idealization is a defense. It allows him to feel loss without accountability. But idealization has limits. Reality eventually interrupts. He sees her boundaries, her calm, her discernment. This version of her does not fit the fantasy, and fantasy breaks. Another fear surfaces. He fears that reaching out will expose emotional asymmetry, that he will care more than she does. Men are rarely taught how to hold asymmetry. They are taught to avoid it because asymmetry feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability, after causing harm, feels unsafe. So he delays, he waits, he watches, and time continues. Another quiet fear. He fears becoming the past, not remembered, but outgrown. Being remembered still feels relevant. Being outgrown does not. A good woman doesn't erase men. She integrates the experience. Integration means he is no longer emotionally active. He is contextual. That status shift is deeply unsettling because it removes emotional influence. Another fear emerges. He fears that if he does change, she may never know. Growth without recognition feels unrewarded, but growth that depends on recognition is not stable. This creates an internal conflict. Change for self or remain the same and preserve ego. Many men hesitate here because ego is familiar. Growth is not. The final fear in this phase is subtle. He fears that hurting a good woman was not an isolated mistake, but a pattern, and patterns imply responsibility. Responsibility demands work. Work demands humility. Humility challenges identity. So fear lingers, not loudly, but persistently. Eventually, fear either transforms or hardens. There is no middle state. Some men sit with the discomfort long enough for something to change. Others rush to escape it. This is where the final distinction appears. A man who grows does not grow because he lost her. He grows because losing her revealed something he could no longer ignore. Growth begins when avoidance stops working, when distractions lose their numbing effect, when new connections feel shallow instead of exciting. This is another fear few talk about. After hurting a good woman, many men discover that novelty does not restore fulfillment. It only postpones awareness. He may meet other women. He may laugh. He may feel temporarily desired. But something is missing. Not her. What he felt with her. Good women don't create excitement. They create coherence. And coherence is rare. Once experienced, it cannot be replaced by intensity. This realization creates quiet grief. Not dramatic, not expressed, but persistent. It surfaces in moments of stillness, late at night, in pauses between conversations, in the absence of emotional depth. Another fear surfaces here. He fears that he may never feel that level of emotional safety again, not because she was perfect, but because she was present. Present without chaos, present without manipulation, present without needing to control. That kind of presence restructures the nervous system. And once the system has experienced regulation, it resists dysregulation. This is why some men begin to compare unconsciously, not in favor of new partners, but against the calm they once felt. And comparison rarely ends in satisfaction. Another realization forms. He understands that what he lost was not the woman. It was the version of himself. He was with her, the grounded version, the more open version, the less defended version. This creates identity grief. Grieving who you could have been is heavier than grieving who you lost. This is why some men carry regret quietly for years, not because they want to return, but because they recognize what they failed to sustain. Another fear becomes undeniable. He fears repeating the pattern, not consciously, but structurally. Without introspection, patterns persist, and without growth, the same ending repeats. Different woman, same rupture. This is when some men choose growth, and others choose familiarity. Growth requires facing the discomfort they once avoided. Familiarity allows blame, externalization, and narrative rewriting. She wanted too much. It wasn't the right time. We weren't compatible. These stories protect the ego, but they don't heal the pattern. Men who choose familiarity often appear unaffected. They move on quickly. They seem confident, but internally, the same fear remains. Fear of emotional exposure, fear of consistency, fear of being fully known, fear of being required to grow. Men who choose growth change quietly, not for approval, not to win her back, but because the cost of remaining the same became too high. They begin to regulate, to listen, to tolerate discomfort, to stay present during conflict. These men don't always return, but they carry the imprint, and that imprint alters how they love for the rest of their lives. Here is the truth most women never hear. A good woman does not teach a man how to love her. She teaches him what love feels like, whether he rises to meet it or not. That feeling becomes a reference point, and reference points do not disappear. They shape expectations. They influence behavior. They haunt avoidance. This is why hurting a good woman creates fear, not because of punishment, but because of contrast. Contrast between who he was and who he became afterward. Contrast between connection and emptiness. Contrast between presence and distraction. A woman who remains grounded after being hurt, who does not chase, who does not collapse, who does not harden, but integrates, leaves a permanent mark, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied something real, and real experiences cannot be undone. They can only be avoided or integrated. So if you ever wonder whether hurting a good woman truly affects a man, the answer is simple. It affects him, whether he admits it or not, whether he returns or not, whether he grows or not. Because once someone experiences regulated love, anything less feels loud. And once someone loses access to calm, silence becomes heavy. A good woman does not need to be remembered. She is felt, and being felt is irreversible. That is why, even long after, even without words, even without contact, the fear remains, not of her, but of what was lost when he failed to protect what was real. And that awareness changes a man, either into someone more conscious or someone permanently guarded. Both outcomes trace back to the same moment, the moment he realized she was good and he was not ready. If this helped you see something more clearly, not about him, but about yourself, pause for a moment and comment the word self-respect below. Not to explain your story, not to prove anything, just as a quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself in places where love was never steady. That choice changes everything that comes next.